Hi, Matt from Modern Samurai here again, and today we're going to talk about why the fight and flight response is only half the story. So quite often what we get is people talk about the fight or flight response, and there's more to it than that. So before we get started, guys, make sure you subscribe, click the bell notification. We upload quite regularly, and obviously leave a comment. Let us know what you want to hear about, let us know what you want discussed, and let us know if you have any sort of thoughts on what we're talking about today. So why am I saying that the fight or flight is only part of the conversation with this? Well, in the main, the martial arts world and the self-defense world and the conflict management world and the physical, and basically all the different tiers to any kind of physical response to conflict, we're all kind of aware of the fight or flight response, okay? And we all understand the basics of that, even if it's only on a superficial level. But we understand that it's a thing and it exists, okay? So I'm not going to go massively into detail on that. Suffice to say that it's a subconscious action. It's from our prehistoric mind, our limbic system that sorts out our emotions and everything else. What that does is when it feels that we are in danger, it will decide how we're going to sort of react to that with regards to fight or flight. Okay, now I talk about that a lot more in other videos, so I don't want to go into it too much now. But one of the things I do want to discuss is more about the freeze. Okay, so that's like the third F in the journey there, but the freeze isn't something that people talk about a lot, and if they do, again, normally it's just sort of glossed over. Now, I'm going to put a suggestion out there that I think that actually there are an awful lot of people out there in the world that actually have a phobia to violence. So they have what is called a phobic reaction. So if you think about a phobia, what do you know about a phobia? Well, people are afraid of spiders, they're afraid of heights, they're afraid of small spaces. There's all these different types of phobias. And I firmly believe that violence is one of those phobias that should be on the list. So what is it then? It's we are scared of it, irrationally scared of it. So it's an extreme or irrational fear or aversion to something. That's the sort of the definition to phobia. Okay, and then if you look at, say, something like the NHS website, they actually use the words overwhelming and debilitating fear. Now that basically sums up that freeze response that we're talking about, doesn't it? We're talking about that overwhelm, that complete inability to react to what's happening around you. Now that to me would lead to believe that it was a phobic reaction. Now they say about how to sort of get around that, and they say, well, actually, if you're afraid of something, then they do things like aversion therapy and counseling and stuff like that. And so again, the way that I tally that in is when you look at, say, a lot of people that work in a actual confrontational and violent role, whatever that may be, they are being desensitized constantly to violence and confrontation because they're dealing with it on a daily basis. Now, what's interesting is that if we look at the actual stats on violence and the criminal stuff like that, then we're aware that it's just getting higher and higher, and it's getting more and more, and so on and so forth. So again, we're not talking about that today's video. Suffice to say that we know that that's happening. But what's interesting, more importantly, on this particular subject is not the levels of crime, but the perceived fear of violence. So if we take an area that is the most afraid of violence and criminality, believe it or not, that's actually the safest area in the UK, but they have a perceived fear. So from my understanding, the areas, I think somewhere in Surrey, where they have the lowest rate of stabbings and violent incidents and things like that, but they have the highest fear of crime and fear of violence towards them. So there must be a correlation there. Okay, so for me, I actually believe that for a lot of people, when they're confronted with violence, it's actually a phobic reaction that they have. So they actually react to it in the same way that somebody else would if they were afraid of spiders or afraid of clowns. That's quite a famous one, so on and so forth. And their reaction is completely far and above just being afraid. So it's more than fear. It's more than that reaction to how you would react to fear. It's more than that. It's amplified. It's exaggerated. It's, to use the terms that the NHS uses, overwhelming and debilitating. So when we're talking about how we're going to train people to react to violence, when we're talking about how are we going to, utilize this knowledge in a self-defense martial arts environment, then again, we have to understand that this is a reality for some people. And it's a reality that isn't often addressed, because in the majority of cases, when you look at the way that people train, they don't train to this exposure therapy level. They don't train to a point where their brain, their body, their psychological, physiological, all of those things, they don't train to a point where they're allowed to catch up with the problem, if you will. So they will still be overwhelmed. They will still be debilitated if they actually are confronted by real violence, because the exposure therapy in this instance, which is martial arts training or self-defense training, isn't actually adequate for the job. So again, I'm not dismissing martial arts training or anything like that. I'm not saying that, because I love martial arts. I've been doing it my whole life. What I'm saying is, if we're looking at this as a phobia, so if we're saying the freeze element of the fight or flight is a phobic response and people have a phobia of violence, then if we're looking at how we're going to get past that, if we're looking at how we're going to train people to deal with that, then we have to look at it almost in the sense of the exposure therapy that they talk about. And in that instance, how can we gear our training up to achieve that in the safest manner possible? Guys, I'd love to hear your comments on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It is an interesting topic, and one that I'm exploring more and more. And if you have any ideas of how you think you can gear training towards helping that kind of particular situation, then let us know. So guys, see you on the next one.